views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Hi, and welcome to Open BXRX Tuesday on BronxNet, a weekly program providing you the latest information, resources, services, and community efforts taking place locally here in the Bronx and virtually. I'm your host, Kibin, Alleyne, and today is Tuesday, November 2nd, 2021. Coming up, New York City found a way for restaurants to thrive during the pandemic with the Open Restaurants Initiative. How will new design rules affect Bronx businesses? And today is Election Day, and New Yorkers are heading to the polls now. How can you use your vote to improve Bronx health? Then, one woman uses her personal experience to make a positive difference in the lives of children in the foster care system. What are some of the factors people often overlook when families and children are struggling? After that, November marks the start of Lung Cancer Awareness Month. A Montefiore health expert joins us for a discussion on how this health condition affects your body. Are some current habits contributing to your risk of lung cancer? So please stick around. Open BXRX Tuesday starts now. Welcome to Open BXRX Tuesday on BronxNet. I'm your host, Kibin, Alleyne, and I'd like to invite you to get social with us at BronxNet TV on Instagram and Twitter and BronxNet Community Television on Facebook. In the wake of the pandemic, New York City found a way for many of us to enjoy our favorite restaurants. Now the city wants to make it a permanent part of NYC's dining experience. Joining me to discuss the latest on the effort is Erick Gregory of the Department of City Planning and Emily Weidenhof of the Department of Transportation. Thank you both for joining us. So I want to start off just talking about open restaurants. Many New Yorkers may have seen it and taken a part of it, but unless you own a restaurant or work in that field, you may not know what it is. So can you tell us more about the Open Restaurants program?
Absolutely. New York City Open Restaurants was an innovative red tape cutting response to a dire emergency. When COVID-19 came to New York City, restaurants could not operate indoors. And so the city very quickly moved to suspend zoning regulations that allowed restaurants to utilize their streets and sidewalks for outdoor dining. And DOT created a one-stop shop self-certification program online that allowed restaurants to apply. The program was incredibly successful. We have upwards of almost 12,000 restaurants that have self-certified through the program, which saved 100,000 jobs. As we transition from pandemic to the permanent program, we're very excited to think strategically and in a really smart way about guidelines that will ensure safety and accessibility and create a program that supports both restaurants and communities for many years to come.
Now, as I mentioned earlier, and you just mentioned briefly, it is on track to becoming a permanent part of our dining experience. Can you tell us why the city may have decided to make this a permanent part of our dining experience in New York City?
Open restaurants, like I said before, was wildly successful, so much participation, and overall, eating outside brought life and vibrant streets to New York City. And that's the spirit that we are looking to maintain in the program. Yet we also want to create really clear guidelines and take a lot of community feedback to make sure that we're shaping a program that can be responsive to all the different needs and uses on our streets. I don't need to tell you that there are so many people that share New York City streets, and we really want to get the balance right to make sure that restaurants can both have outdoor dining, but they can also get the critical deliveries that they need, and that emergency vehicles have access to blocks, and that our sidewalks are open and clear for people of all abilities to get to where they need to go.
So, because you mentioned that it's going to be a permanent part of New York City, that's super exciting. There is now a citywide public engagement process for design rules on permanent outdoor dining setups located on our city streets. Can one of you tell us more about that?
Yeah, thank you. We've heard a lot to date about the program that Emily mentioned, the emergency setups where there's been over 12,000 restaurants that are participating currently. Want to note that there's 650 in the Bronx alone, which is quite a lot compared to the 30 that participated pre-COVID. So it's a wildly successful program. We've learned a lot through public engagement. We've been to 59 community boards over the summer, really hearing critical feedback, a lot of concerns around noise, quality of life, sanitation, trash, and those are really important things for us to gather. And now as we move towards a phase where we're trying to see how that input translates into design, and how can we learn from the setups that are currently out there and making them even better and more responsive. So really take into account the challenges that restaurateurs have been up against, while also making sure that we're being better neighbors to those around us.
So, I'm really curious to know what are some of the rules that we have now for outdoor dining, and how will this program or this initiative build upon that?
Yeah, so pre-COVID, there was a sidewalk cafe program that was very limited in geography. As Emily said earlier, only certain parts of the city had access to that. And so by opening this up citywide, it really puts a lot of emphasis on the siting of these restaurants. So, are you making sure that you're maintaining a distance from a fire hydrant? How close are you to a bus stop? Are there bike lanes present? So these are things that are happening right in front of a business where we need to make sure that they're accounting for those sidewalk furniture and other obstructions, maintaining the appropriate distances and clearances, so that we make sure that our sidewalks are accessible and clear for the movement of people. So again, making sure that there's a balanced approach here with all the things that take place on a sidewalk. And so it's critical for us to really learn from what we did in the past. And as Emily mentioned, what are some things that we can kind of streamline going forward? So how do we make the rules clear and the guidance straightforward?
So, there has been an increased effort to keep things safe between diners, drivers, cyclists, and pedestrians. Can you tell us more about those efforts? Because I'm always super curious every time I see like an outdoor dining space. I'm like, what's going on here? Like, how is that safe? So, I know you guys are working on that. Can you tell us a little bit more?
The theme of today and this whole effort is balance. So again, with so many different users of our streets, safety as well as accessibility is really it's key for us. And so New York City is huge. And when we put forth the emergency program, we were looking to create a simple set of guidelines. As we work towards a permanent program, it creates a great opportunity for us to fine tune a lot of the guidelines, beginning to account for more nuances of street widths to make sure that vehicles can turn with ease onto blocks, particularly emergency vehicles and large fire trucks. We're also going to be crafting guidelines that will ensure vehicles can see important traffic signs, making sure there are key sight lines between vehicles, pedestrians, and cyclists to ensure safety with the program. And accessibility is also a key piece of this program, not only making sure that outdoor dining is fully accessible, but also that our sidewalks are able to be used by all the different people of varying abilities that need to get to where they need to go and need to access businesses, residences, work, um, all different and very important uses of our sidewalks.
Now, I'm really curious to know, what will this process mean for Bronx businesses, or maybe businesses that are more like mom and pop, smaller businesses? Could you tell me a little bit about that?
Yes. So as mentioned earlier, we've heard a lot already in our interactions with every community board in the city, and so many folks from the Bronx community have come to those and shared their questions and concerns about what the current open restaurants program. And I think what we need to do is understand some of the challenges that restaurant owners have faced. A lot of different agencies are coming to inspect their setups, not just Department of Transportation, but our colleagues at Department of Sanitation and Department of Health. And so there's a lot of different entities from the city side that are coming to review these. And how do we going forward? How do we make sure that we're providing guidance that's understandable and clear? What types of resources are we providing to areas of the city that may not have the support? And it's really key that we're working with business owners and communities to understand what's happening on the ground.
Now, will this be open to any New York City restaurant, or is there an application process or possibly eligibility requirements?
Yeah, happy to start, and maybe Emily can add as well. So the permanent program that we're working on, in some respects, will still be open to all parts of the city. It's really going to come down to documenting well the things that are happening on the sidewalk in front of your business. So again, ensuring that you're maintaining the appropriate clear path for pedestrians, and also ensuring that you're maintaining the right distances from key pieces of infrastructure like fire hydrants. That we've learned a lot from the application process, as Emily mentioned, that really finding ways to make this an easier way for people to apply. That was definitely one of the challenges pre-COVID, where it was a very expensive process. It required licensed architecture firms and engineers to sign off on drawings, and it was very cumbersome. That said, as we're trying to make sure it's accessible and streamlined, it's still important that community boards have the ability to review these in certain instances to make sure that they're going to fit appropriately into a local neighborhood. So I think it's important to recognize that while we are finding ways to make it a little bit easier and accessible for businesses, there are still checkpoints and engagement that has to happen with community boards to ensure that quality of life standards are met and maintained.
Now, I'm sorry. Were you going to say something?
Yeah, and I was just going to add that, like Erick said, it ultimately won't work for everyone, but we continue to think about innovative solutions to engage restaurants and have some great examples of open street efforts. Alexander Avenue, Arthur Avenue, two fantastic open streets with fabulous restaurants in the Bronx. So at DOT, we're going to continue to engage with communities to think about additional ways to enhance public space in neighborhoods and also create opportunities for restaurants and outdoor dining.
So that's really amazing. I know a huge part of this is is inviting the public to address their opinions. So can you just let people know where they can learn more or keep in touch with your organizations?
So nyc.gov/open restaurants is our main place for all relevant program information. There you can see the current program guidelines as well as timelines for the permanent program. And there we will also be actively posting about our outreach events, about surveys, and other ways for folks to engage and give us their input about the program.
All right. Thank you both so much for joining us. We'll be right back.
If you're struggling to afford your internet bills during the pandemic, there's a temporary government program that may be able to help. It's called the Emergency Broadband Benefit, and it provides up to $50 monthly discount on your broadband bill to qualifying households. Find more information about the program, including if you qualify and how to enroll, at fcc.gov/broadbandbenefit, or call toll-free at 833-511-0311. That's 833-511-0311.
We know that people are dealing with the health crisis, but there's also a lot of food insecurity.
We're giving out healthy food options, and that's what's key here.
If you're a senior, you have a disability, they'll actually deliver meals to you.
The residents are anxious, they're worried, they're scared, they want to be tested.
When things were happening in our community and we couldn't get the help.
There's almost a presumption of criminality that attaches to your skin color.
The site will prioritize those who are at highest risk in the population.
If you feel symptoms and you'd like to visit one of these COVID-19 testing sites here in the Bronx, you may call the State Health Department's hotline.
Important to note about this site is no reservations are needed. This is a walk-in clinic.
A lot of us are out of work and looking for something to do.
We have the machinery and the skills to make large scales of these masks and gowns.
Take care of your people. It's going to go way further than we actually can understand.
Right now, employees like myself are just adjusting
to the new reality.
Reporting from Bronxnet, this is Trans.
Welcome back. New Yorkers across the 5 boroughs are heading to the polls to vote for New York City mayor, borough presidents, and several other elected positions. Joining me to discuss the importance of voting and how we can use it to improve Bronx health is Charmaine Ruddock, Program Director of Bronx Health Reach. Charmaine, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here with you.
So can you first just tell us about your organization and why you decided to actually advocate for voting?
Sure. So Bronx Health Reach is a 22-year-old community coalition led by the Institute for Family Health with a charge of addressing racial and ethnic health disparities and eliminating it with a particular focus on the healthy behaviors vis-a-vis healthy eating, physical activity in our community. Bronx Health Reach is part of CDC's National Initiative Reach, which stands for Racial and Ethnic Approaches to Community Health, which got launched in 1999. And its charge is to eliminate racial and ethnic health disparities with a particular focus. That is the communities that are most experiencing these disparities that should be leading the effort in eliminating those disparities and establishing health equity. In terms of our looking to advocate for voting, about 7 years ago, Bronx Health Reach was one of several organizations that was invited by the Bronx District Public Health Office to participate in a video that came out of the fact that in the RWJF rankings, the Bronx is ranked 62 out of New York State's 62 counties in health outcomes and the factors contributing to those outcomes. What does that mean? It means that we're ranked last. We're the unhealthiest borough, the unhealthiest county. And so a group of us decided instead of, oh, woe is us, let's do something actively, proactively about this, in addition to the work that we've been doing in our respective organizations. And so we launched a steering committee and launched a Not 62 campaign for a healthy Bronx. Why are we advocating for voting? Because I think, as we all know, as the viewers and listeners know, voting changes things. Voting either brings into office those who are going to be champions of the things that matter most to a community, or they're going to be champions for things that matter to others, but not the community. And with us being 62, we understand that voting is one of the tools that the Bronx community has to effect the kind of transformative change that will move us out of being last place.
Thank you. So I wanted to touch on that a little bit. You mentioned Not 62. Coming from a background in health, I think it may be hard for people to see how they can change Bronx health by voting. Can you just detail what that looks like?
Sure. So look, when we look at the data and the statistics, and we look at the state of things in the Bronx around health issues, as I mentioned, And it's no surprise to Bronxites, particularly those not living in the most affluent parts of the Bronx, that in terms of access to quality health care, in terms of access to healthy food, in terms of access to a healthy environment where their children can be going out there. We have the ingredients for a very unhealthy borough, right? It is not surprising to anybody, given what people live in their everyday lives, why we're so unhealthy. The fact of the matter is that the policies that will transform the Bronx, the people who are the decision makers behind those policies, we need to have those decision makers, those policy makers in place whose priority is transforming the Bronx, for whom the current status quo in the Bronx, particularly the folks in the Bronx who have been here forever experiencing these health outcomes, that they should be prioritized, that the sort of policies, the sort of changes that will affect that will be something that they are driving. We had a coalition meeting 2 Fridays ago, and we had somebody come and speak on the issue of voting and the importance of it. And they pointed out to us, and in subsequent conversations, people brought it up again, that we do not have a question of representation. The Bronx is the only county, the only borough in New York City where the majority of the people are people of color. Our representatives look like the people, look like their constituents, right? We're also the borough where the elected officials come from a political party that is known for championing the causes and the needs of those people in the Bronx. So the question is, why aren't those changes made? And so one of the things that the members of the Bronx Health Reach Coalition is looking at is, we need to get people in power who will champion the concerns that we have, who are obviously championing our causes.
No, I think that's a really good way to segue into voting a little bit more. When it comes to voting, people often think of the highest position in our country, which is the president. And although that is very important, can you tell us the importance of local elections?
Mm-hmm. I think of Tip O'Neill, who was a speaker in the House in Congress during the time of Ronald Reagan, but he said something that has resonated throughout the years when he said, all politics is local, right? We are hopefully coming out of a pandemic that brutally laid bare the disparities and the discrepancies in the lives of many poor communities, particularly poor communities of color. The change, we are also, and the reason why Bronx Health Reach has really this year reminded people to focus on the elections, that last year's election, yes, was about changing the president. Today, on November 2nd, is one of the most pivotal election days that Bronx residents and New York City residents on a whole will be part of. This is the day where we're voting for mayor. For the Bronx, we're voting for a borough president. We're voting for many city council members. We're voting for the New York City controller. These are key elected offices that we're voting for, those office holders who will take office at the beginning of next year. This cannot be overstated as a critical and a pivotal election for those of us in New York City.
Now, the world of politics and government can be intimidating for some people. And if you're in that booth, some may find themselves asking, who are some of these people? What are some ways that people can stay knowledgeable about who they're voting for?
One of the things, Bronx Health Reach sent out a recent e-blast listing all the folks who are running for the different offices, right? There's also a website. The mayor's office has I think it's called Office of Democracy. That's if you click on that link, you will find the different office holders, and people should also go and Google them, see what people's positions have been, see how they're addressing the issues that are of paramount importance to us. Many of them have some of the key, those who are leading in their races have made public protestations of their agenda. So people can easily go to Google and look up and become informed consumers. There was a department store years ago, I don't know if they're still in existence, that the name of it was Sims. And Sims had a line, an informed consumer is our best customer. We should think ourselves as voters as becoming educated so we can be the best, make the best voting decisions when we get into those voting booths.
Now, what can we do to learn more about your organization and stay connected?
So for Bronx Health Reach, there are a number of ways you can find out about us. You can go to www.bronxhealthreach.org, our website. You can find us on Twitter at BX Health Reach. And we're also on Instagram and on Facebook, and you can learn much about us.
Now, lastly, one quick thing. Do you have any advice for somebody who may be a little bit on the fence about voting? What would you quickly say to them?
So today, November 2nd, is voting day. I know some of us may have voted already in the early elections, but if you haven't, please, please, please find the time to go and vote today. The quality of our lives that we will live over the next not only this election cycle, but coming election cycles will very much be determined by who takes over and makes the decisions, particularly as we look to build a better Bronx and a better New York City. It is imperative that we vote and vote today. Remind your neighbors and your friends, call folks. Call everybody that you know and say to them, if you haven't voted already, please go and vote today. If you need to be taken to vote, I'll help you. I'll help make sure you get to vote, but you have to go out. Today, November 2nd, is the day when we start telling those who are seeking office and who will get to office that we are committed and unabashed in our efforts to make a better Bronx.
Charmaine, thank you so much. I love your passion and enthusiasm about this. It's super important. So once again, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me on such an important day when all Bronxites, hopefully, are going out to vote to start making a difference as we build better.
We'll be right back.
We built a media network for you.
BronxNet TV.
Come learn in your new state-of-the-art studios at Lehman College.
At Mercy College.
And coming soon to the South Bronx in the Hub.
Inspire with your stories, culture, history.
Your Bronx on BronxNet.
Engage with us.
Connect with us at your channels and at bronxnet.tv.
Learn, engage, inspire. BronxNet TV.
From the Bronx
to the world.
BronxNet.
Welcome back. One woman is using her personal experience to make a difference in the lives of children and families who need that extra support. Joining us to discuss the work she's doing to keep families together is Eunice Escudero. And from the organization, The Children's Village, we have David Collins. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
So Eunice, can you tell me about your background that inspired you to enter the field of working with children and their families?
Yes, absolutely. First off, just thank you for the opportunity to share what inspires me to work with children and families. For me, it's always been my own family that inspires me every day to do what I do. More specifically, my grandparents emigrated to the United States from Chile in the 1970s, along with my mother and aunt. And they would often share how challenging it was at first to find their footing in the US. My grandpa would always tell us that New York City was very competitive and you always had to have your wits about you when navigating this big city.
Now, I understand that when your family came to the US, as you mentioned, there were several factors working against you that made the experience challenging. Can you explain what those factors were?
Absolutely. Language barrier, as well as establishing a sense of community, were two major factors. My mom would often share that when she emigrated, she was about 11 or 12. So she didn't really know the language. And back in the 70s, school systems didn't really have bilingual classes or integrated classes in that sense to support anybody who was new to the US. So she sat there, the material went over her head, and she was failing miserably. So thankfully, a school teacher saw that there was some, deeper challenges with her and pulled her aside and realized it was that she didn't know the English language. So he gifted her a Spanish-English dictionary, and she would translate all of her assignments by herself, answer them in Spanish, and then translate it all back. And you can imagine that would take hours. Eventually, my mom made it to high school, but dropped out because she just found it to be way too challenging and experienced a lot of bullying as a result.
Now, I'm curious to hear from both of you. Do you feel those challenges are still prevalent today, especially for families that are moving from other countries where, they may not speak English?
I could answer that, David, if you like. I would like to share that, yes, absolutely. Families that emigrate from all parts of the world to the US may experience these struggles like language barriers and establishing a supportive community.
Yeah, 100% agree. We're at Children's Village, we're involved in, some programs that try to make the adjustment experience easier for children and families who are arriving. And there are some improvements that have been made, but I think there's still a long way to go.
Are there possibly any other factors that are often overlooked when people see families and children struggling?
I think that with, some other factors that can be overlooked, or I'd say like overcasted, is, usually we see the young adults really struggling, in their school community or even in their, own neighborhood. Whereas back home, they may have had, again, this sense of community and, it takes a village to raise a child. So, the caregivers would have relied on their, aunties and uncles and cousins. When you put that youth in a new environment, they have to establish new support and a new ecology pretty quickly. And that comes with its own challenges.
Well, I love that you said, it takes a village to raise a child, because that's going to kind of lead into my next question. Could you actually tell us more about your organization, Children's Village?
Sure. Children's Village was founded in 1851. It was historically a residential institution for mostly recently arrived immigrants, and the young people served over the years reflected sort of the waves of immigration to New York City. In the last 20 years, I think our field and Children's Village specifically have realized that institutional care should not be the default, and that children need loving families. They need connections to their communities. And usually they already have those, and what they need is support to maintain them. So over the last 15 years or so, our programming has shifted away from institutional care and towards community-based programming to help support families and keep them together. And Eunice is an example, a big example of that.
Okay, yeah, I was just going to ask, I'm curious to know like why you joined, this field and working with families and children.
David or myself?
That was for David.
Oh, sure. I tell people I fell into this by chance, but I stayed in it by choice. I got a job as a tutor when I was 19 years old at a group home for boys, and never left. I became a child care worker. I was a frontline staff for many years. And then later on had an opportunity to go back to school and become a social worker and stay in the field. So I just love working with young people. I didn't know that was going to be my calling when I first took the job, but once I was there, it just felt right.
Now, I'm curious to know, how does this program cater to children as well as parents and or adults?
So, at Children's Village are several community-based programs. However, all of the community-based programs cater to all individuals in the home. So the caregiver subsystem, the children subsystem. And I would say for the caregivers, the support is really just offering, either reinforcing or teaching them skills to reinforce their structure, the hierarchy of the home, right? They're the parents. And I know we were talking about families that emigrate or are new to the US. They may feel that structure shift a little bit. Whereas at home, they were the head of the household. Here, they may find it a bit challenging when they hear acronyms like ACS being thrown at them. It kind of like may shatter them a little bit or have them shake a little bit. So we come in and we really help empower caregivers by letting them know and showing them their own evidence that they really have what it takes to establish that hierarchy here. For the children, or I would say, more specifically for those young adults who are really struggling, we see some of those behaviors in the community shine through. It's really getting down to the bottom of what's really driving some of these behaviors. And to be more specific, behaviors like truancy or substance use or just association with the wrong crowd, right? Not really hanging around with the great kind of kids out there. So really understanding what's driving the behavior and then aligning that with the caregiver's desired outcomes and then supporting them by just coming up with interventions and ways to help caregivers really, again, strengthen their support to their young person in the home. So it's very holistic.
Awesome. So can you tell me more about the Families First approach the Children's Village is taking and how that began?
Sure. So Families First is federal legislation that was passed in 2018, but I'd say it also refers to a philosophy that, generally children need to be with families, and that, that families are the best place for them, and that most families have the ability with the right supports to take care of their kids. Prior to the Families First Act being passed by Congress in 2018, there was only federal funding available for family separation. So every state and city is required to have a child protection and a child welfare system, but they only received federal dollars if they were taking kids out of the home. And that's produced terrible outcomes. It's a historic injustice. It's primarily impacted Black and brown communities, including here in New York City. And it's just the wrong way to go about social services to children and families. So it's the old saying, if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Well, for years, from a federal perspective, all we had was foster care. And that was not the way to go about it. So in 2018, the Families First Preventive Services Act authorized the use of federal dollars to do more family preservation, to provide legal supports to families who are under investigation, and to be more restrictive about when we would consider putting a young person into like an institutional setting, and set standards for when that would happen, and some of the kind of guardrails around that process. Yeah. So overall, it's designed to make it more likely that kids stay with their families and succeed in the community, and we're big believers in that.
Wow, that's amazing. I really didn't know that. So thank you so much for sharing that with me. because of that, I would really like to know what are some challenges that, children, that are dealing with this, whether they're in foster care or group homes, et cetera, what are these challenges that they're facing that we may not be aware of?
I'll say, what we always tell people is that we don't have any bad kids at Children's Village. We have kids to whom bad things have happened. And a lot of people look at some of those, surface behaviors that Eunice was describing, like, truancy or experimenting with drugs or having some high risk peer networks. And they think of, oh, this kid is acting up, or this, this young person is on the wrong path. But usually there are a lot of systemic failures that get to that point. And that doesn't mean that we don't help kids change their behavior or try to hold them accountable if they do harm to someone. We want to teach them what are the expectations, in society. But we just also recognize that, there are institutional failures that have led to those situations for those kids most of the time, whether it's, living in highly segregated neighborhoods where there's been disinvestment from school systems and from community resources, whether it's over policing, whether it's, some of the barriers that families face due to being low income or being recently arrived immigrants. The list kind of goes on and on. And often these are intergenerational barriers. They're things that have been going on in families for a long time. And really, someone needs to step in and break that cycle as opposed to pointing a finger and blaming people.
Now, I really want to go in to talk about the prevention work that you're doing. I think it's super important, just as like helping with recovery. How do we prevent this, these tragedies from happening?
I think, again, it goes back to the family, and not just the family, but like David was saying, all these other systemic factors involved. So in the preventive work that we do, we usually, a youth is highlighted. So a particular youth in the home becomes, the identified client, so to say. But that's not to say that the approach is going to be very narrow and individualistic. It's very systemic. So some of the behaviors that we may see might be some truancy. I would like to phrase this like truancy light, where it's like the youth is perhaps cutting classes here and there, attending some classes, maybe experimenting with some drugs, maybe arriving home late, but these behaviors have not exacerbated to the point of the youth getting arrested. So the preventive programs really come in to work with these families and their social supports as well. And if they don't have one, then they help establish one to really tackle some of those concerns. And like I said, the interventions are very specific to the needs of the youth and to the strengths of the family.
Thank you so much for joining us, both of you. I really appreciate taking the time to speak with me about this. Can you just let people know where they can learn more about your organization?
Sure. You can visit us on the web at childrensvillage.org, or you can find us on social media. And if anybody is in need of support in the Bronx or anywhere else, feel free to reach out to us. And if we don't have it, we probably know somebody that does.
All right. Thank you. We'll be right back with more Open BXRX Tuesday. Welcome back. November marks the start of Lung Cancer Awareness Month. Here to discuss the effects of the life-altering disease is Dr. Linda Haramati of the Montefiore Health System and Albert Einstein College of Medicine. Dr. Haramati, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So I wanted to start off by saying lung cancer is the second most common cancer in both men and women. I'm always curious to know how these various types of cancers affect our body. So can you just explain what happens when you're diagnosed with lung cancer?
So lung cancer, it develops inside the lungs itself or within the airways where we take in air from the mouth that going into the lungs. And abnormal cells start to proliferate and develop into cancer, which is actually, in most cases, a slow process. And the disease, the disease manifests clinically a little bit later on, but we can catch it at a very early stage if we do lung cancer screening.
Now, I'm curious to know, like in my research, I found, I don't know if this is true, that there's multiple types of cancers. Can you just confirm that with me and tell me a little bit more about that? Well, lung cancer, I'm sorry, multiple different types of lung cancer.
There are different subtypes or cell types of lung cancer. All of them are associated with smoking. Some of them are more slowly growing. Some of them are more rapidly progressing. But all of them have a lot of things in common, including the parts of the lung that they affect, and the kind of the approach to treatment varies somewhat depending on the subtype.
Now, I understand that you have a lot of background with screening for this disease and was part of a program that specialized in this. Can you tell us more about that experience?
It was really exciting to be a part of lung cancer screening at Montefiore. In 2011, a very important clinical trial was published where they looked at using CT scans, CAT scans, a kind of X-rays to evaluate for whether or not it's using that screening with CAT scans saves lives from lung cancer. And it showed that there was a dramatic improvement in the lung cancer survival when screening eligible patients with CAT scans for lung cancer. And after that trial was published, we began a lung cancer screening program at Montefiore focusing on our patients in the Bronx and reaching out to the appropriate population. And we've had a really successful program since that time. We enrolled our first patient in 2012, so it's been 9 years, and the program is growing and growing, and we're trying to reach out to more and more eligible patients in order to save as many lives as possible from lung cancer.
Now, do you find it challenging to find patients that are at risk, or maybe those patients are a little bit apprehensive towards getting screened?
Well, we rely on the primary care doctors to refer the patients to us, but I think that's a known thing with lung cancer in particular, is that people are very there is a certain amount of apprehension about screening for lung cancer because of the link with smoking, and there's some stigma that's been shown that people are a little bit more reluctant to come for, say, lung cancer screening than breast cancer screening, which also had a stigma back in the day, but now there's much more awareness of the importance of breast cancer screening. And for lung cancer screening, we're in the earlier stages of trying to overcome that stigma.
Oh, wow, that's interesting. I really didn't know that. So thank you for sharing that with me. Now, according to the American Cancer Society, lung cancer is by far the leading cause of cancer death among both men and women, making up almost 25% of all cancer deaths. It's commonly understood that smoking, like you mentioned, plays a part, but are there any other lifestyle factors and habits, as well as inherited genes, that can heighten your risk?
So it's true that lung cancer, the most common risk factor for lung cancer is cigarette smoking by far. And the amount that you smoke and the length of time that you smoke and how recently you smoke are all factors. Other less common factors are secondhand smoke. Say you grew up with a heavy smoker, or you work in an environment where there's a lot of smoking, which is much less of a factor nowadays because indoor smoking in the work environment has basically been eliminated. But if you have a history of that, another risk factor for lung cancer is occupational exposure. For example, asbestos exposure is a risk factor for lung cancer. And then another interesting little niche area is exposure to radon, which is like in the homes. So like if you move into a new home and they say test your house for radon, radon is a gas that's emitted from the rocks beneath you. So if you live in an area where there is radon within the rocks, then it's recommended to test your home for radon. And because radon is a gas, it's a very easy solution, which is just to increase ventilation inside the area. It's usually in your basement, and that markedly decreases the amount of home radon exposure. So that's like a little bit of an interesting factor. But all of those are less common risk factors than smoking. Family history is also important and is a risk factor.
Now, many people try to avoid, with the smoking, so they'll switch to vaping or hookah and other recreational activities. Will these have the same or similar outcomes?
So that's a very controversial and hip topic. So I'm glad you raised it, although I am not an expert in vaping and hookah. The FDA just in October, a couple of weeks ago, put out a call for using certain vaping products to help adult active cigarette smokers reduce their cigarette smoking activity, because they feel that vaping, for the most part, is a harm reduction strategy for people who are trying to quit smoking, and it's another opportunity for nicotine replacement. But it is very controversial in the literature, and there are cultural issues because obviously we don't want young people who are not addicted to nicotine to become addicted, and there's been some targeting of the youthful population for vaping, and hookah. As far as I know, there are no medical uses for hookah, but like I said, I'm not a vaping and hookah expert.
All right, well, thank you so much. I'm happy that we did touch on that because it was something I've heard many times before. I'm also curious to know, how does this affect those who just quit smoking entirely? So let's say maybe you smoked for a long period of time and then you suddenly quit. How does your risk change then?
So quitting smoking is probably the most important thing you can do to reduce your risk for lung cancer. And your risk of cancer decreases basically every year that you've quit smoking. So it's a really, really important thing. And the longer, the farther away time-wise that you quit smoking, the less your risk of lung cancer. But nowadays in the United States, there still are a lot of people who are former smokers who develop lung cancer, even though it's at a reduced risk, which is why for lung cancer screening, we will screen using the current eligibility criteria. We will screen both current smokers as well as former smokers who quit within the last 15 years. And they had to have a heavy smoking history of at least 20 pack years, which is basically smoking a pack a day for 20 years or a half a pack a day for 40 years, so that it's the number of packs a day multiplied by the number of years, and to give you a total of at least 20 pack years of smoking. Screening is also eligible using the latest criteria for people who are in the age range of between 50 and 80. So current or former smokers who are actively smoking or quit within the last 15 years and are between ages 50 and 80 would be people who would be eligible potentially for lung cancer screening.
So what are some prevention methods people can take I know we said stop smoking is one of them. Are there any other prevention methods people can take to lower their risk?
Well, even reducing the amount that you smoke lowers the risk. So if you're an active smoker, you should never think that you can't lower your risk. You can smoke less, and quitting takes, for many people, multiple attempts. People need help with that. So it's something you should never give up on, quitting smoking, which is a really big goal. And there are many different strategies out there, to help people quit smoking. So that's really important. And then there's the radon in your basement. You can test your basement for that. And then once you're eligible for lung cancer screening, that's an important factor, because screening detected lung cancers tend to be at a very, very, very early and curable stage. And so that is a chance to save your life. And it's been proven at the highest scientific level with what they call randomized clinical trials, which is the highest level of evidence that we use in medicine.
Now, typically the Bronx faces higher risk when looking at so many health conditions. Did you find that in regards to lung cancer?
So when you compare, for example, Bronx population with Manhattan, the risk of developing lung cancer is higher for both men and women, and it's higher as you get older. So there is an increased risk of lung cancer within the Bronx for whatever variety of multifactorial reasons as is the case for most cancers.
Now, can you just let people know where they can learn more?
So in terms of learning more about lung cancer?
Learning more about lung cancer and screening.
Oh, so, well, the U.S. Preventive Services Task Force, called the USPSTF, has these new guidelines that were published in 2021. And if you look on their website, USPSTF, you should be able to find those guidelines and read about the opportunity to save your life with lung cancer screening. And it's really something that is like discussed with your doctor if you're a current or former smoker, to talk about the options for quitting smoking and also undergoing screening if you're in the appropriate category.
All right, doctor, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
That's all for our show today. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Kibin, wishing you and yours safety and wellness now and always. See you next time.